I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute. I believe in an America that is officially neither Catholic, Protestant, nor Jewish, where no public official either requests or accepts instructions on public policy from the Pope, the National Council of Churches, or any other ecclesiastical source.
Very late in my political career, I had the opportunity to read the speech, and I almost threw up.
You bet that makes you throw up.
In Texas tonight, public education and politics at a crossroads. The state's Board of Education has voted to change what school children learn about American history.
This time, the strong conservative bloc is pushing to correct what it sees as a liberal bias.
I'm really pleased to actually move it to the balance. We have not swung it to the right, swung it to the middle.
Here are some of the proposed changes. Textbooks must now include mention of the conservative resurgence of the 80s and 90s, the National Rifle Association, the moral majority, and include the idea that our founding fathers may not have intended a separation of church and state. Even some vocabulary would change, and the expression slave trade would be changed to the Atlantic Triangular Trade. Some critics see that as a move to deny slavery.
This is a radical group that wants your kids to learn what they want to tell them and not what actually happened. And that should be of concern to all of us, regardless of party.
The school board sets the standards for the nearly 5 million Texas public school children. But traditionally, the board's influence has extended far beyond the state because their books are often sold nationwide at an attractive price.
Right now, in 2011, Republicans in 32 states are considering adding more onerous ID requirements to make it harder to register and harder to vote. You know who's a likely Democratic voter? A poor voter, a low-income voter. You know what might make fewer low-income people vote? If you don't allow people to register or to vote unless they show a kind of ID that poor people are less likely to have. You know who else is a likely Democratic voter? Minority voters. You know what might make fewer of them vote? If you force people to show a kind of ID that minorities are less likely to have. You know who else is a likely Democratic voter? College students. You see how this goes. Say that you can't vote or you can't register unless you show ID that college students are less likely to have, and you can thereby reduce the number of college students who are voting. First-time voters are another constituency that's more likely to vote Democratic. If you want to make sure that fewer of them vote, get rid of the ability to register and vote on the same day. First-time voters love that. So stop doing that. A restrictive new voter ID law for Texas, which, just like all of these, is expected to make it a lot harder for young people, first-time voters, poor voters, minority voters, and other traditional Democratic constituencies to get registered to vote and to actually cast their vote. So they did include two exemptions to this draconian new voter ID law. Two exemptions. The two exemptions are for the elderly and for people who have concealed carry gun permits. So the only people they have exempted from their new Make It Harder to Vote voter ID bill are the most reliably Republican constituencies in the country other than the Cheney family, gun owners and the very old. It's also not about voter fraud.
The Ohio Board of Elections told Think Progress that they had not heard of one case of voter impersonation. And a statewide survey of Ohio found only 4 cases of ineligible voters from the election cycle of 2002 and 2004. Now think about that. 4 out of 9 million votes.
What you see here is the Republican vision of or for women. Darrell Issa, chair of the Congressional Oversight Committee, held a hearing about President Obama's mandate about employer coverage of birth control on insurance plans. Now, this hearing was held after President Obama offered the compromise. Let's take a look at this panel. There's the Most Reverend William E. Laurie, the Roman Catholic Bishop of Bridgeport, Connecticut. Reverend Dr. Matthew Harrison, President of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. C. Ben Mitchell, Graves Professor of Moral Philosophy at Union University, which is an evangelical Christian college associated with the Tennessee Baptist Convention. Rabbi Meyer Soloveichik, who is with Yeshiva University. And Craig Mitchell, Chair of the Ethics Department from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. All male, all religious, all conservative. When Democrats objected to this panel, they were ignored, and then they left, refusing to participate in this farce. Now, it's true that 2 women, also associated with conservative religious institutions, were scheduled to speak that afternoon. Apparently women, the one group most directly affected by birth control, weren't considered important enough to speak first. It has also been noted that only representatives of the conservative religious view were invited to speak. Many other religious groups, including some Catholic groups who approved of Obama's compromise, weren't invited. Apparently, Issa only wanted one voice heard, the conservative one. But how can you have a panel concerning birth control that doesn't consider women or women's rights or a women's point of view? The decision whether or not to prescribe oral contraceptives, which is really what we're talking about here, is one that should be made by doctors in consultation with their patients. It is a medical decision. There seems to be a disconnect here. At least 98% of women have used birth control at some time in their life, and yet there is this conservative attack on birth control. Now, this is a direct assault on women's rights, but it's also an assault, although more indirectly, on men and men's rights, because men also have the right to control their bodies. Because of current birth control options, men often are relying on women's choices, and as women's choices are removed, so are men's.
Once the 82nd legislature adjourned late this summer, several new laws are now set to take effect. Probably the most controversial, a new sonogram abortion bill that Governor Perry deemed priority legislation. It stipulates that a woman seeking an abortion view a sonogram and hear the heartbeat of the fetus 24 hours before undergoing an abortion. That
women who do see the sonogram, the child moving around in the womb, swimming, waving, sucking his or her thumb, as well as the heartbeat.
And one final comment about Virginia's other anti-woman bill, the one requiring a woman to have a vaginal ultrasound before she has an abortion. Marshall commented about this that, this wouldn't be invasive. I mean, after all, abortion itself is invasive. But, this is like the difference between consensual sex and rape. And ordering a woman to have a vaginal ultrasound is rape.